You're listening to episode 158 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Today we have a roundtable discussion with film producer Sigrid Dyekjaer, director Phie Ambo, and researcher Dr. Richard Davidson about the new film Free the Mind. We live in a very exciting time, especially as meditators. It is likely that we've experienced the benefits of regular practice. We see how it helps us in daily life, and not just us, but those around us. But that message is sometimes difficult to share with others, as misperceptions about the validity of meditation abound. We face a twofold problem: how to demonstrate the value of what we're doing, and how to share that knowledge more widely. Fortunately, we're seeing a growth in contemplative neuroscience and a body of scientific research to help our understanding about the mechanisms and results of meditation. And today's podcast is about sharing that understanding with others through film. Sigrid Dyekjaer has produced more than 20 documentary films, among them The Monastery, Mr. Vig and the Nun in 2006, Gambler in 2006, Mechanical Love in 2007, and The Good Life in 2011. This year, Love Addict was shown in Amsterdam at the world's biggest festival for documentary films. Phie Ambo has directed a number of award-winning films for the cinema, including major works such as Family, Gambler, and Mechanical Love. Her films have been screened in cinemas as well as over 90 festivals and on television throughout the world. Her films Mechanical Love and Free the Mind are part of her trilogy on fundamental human questions. Dr. Richard Davidson is a William James and Willis Research Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He received his Ph.D. from Harvard University in psychology and has been at Wisconsin since 1984. He has published more than 250 articles, chapters, and reviews, and edited 13 books. Dr. Davidson is the founder of the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds. Please note that the Indiegogo campaign linked on the webpage for this episode has only 31 days remaining, so if you would like to help support the film, we encourage you to visit the campaign soon. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice orange zinger tea. Well, we have a very exciting roundtable discussion today. Joining us from Copenhagen are film director Phie Ambo. Phie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Film producer Sigrid Dyekjaer. Sigrid, thank you so much for being here as well.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
And returning to the podcast for a second conversation with us, Dr. Richard Davidson is here in the Midwest. Thank you for being here and welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So I want to get started by asking Sigrid and Phie for each of you to give a little bit of your background and how you two have worked together in the past. Sigrid, why don't we start with you?
I'm a producer in Denmark, and I've worked doing documentary films for the past 13 years, and I've worked with Phie Ambo for the past 8 years. So we've been doing a lot of films together. And I always try to support the the idea that the director has and really make that come to a film. So it's I don't really have my own ideas, you could say it that way. I more support the ideas that the director has.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Phie, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, my background is I was educated from the National Danish Film School in 2003, but I made my first feature-length film in 2001. And that was, even though it was my first film, it was a feature-length film. And that was why I got the taste of doing these long cinematic films, because they really can reach a wide audience worldwide. And it's a very powerful media to work in, because people, when you sit in a cinema, they're very open, so you can really talk to people's emotions when you do documentary films for the cinema. So I completely fell in love with this way of working ever since my first film.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We appeal to people's visceral senses on several levels, visual and auditory, and we really grab them in film. So thank you for sharing that. So, Phie, as we launch into the questions about it, before we go into a summary of the documentary itself, tell us how it came about. What happened that led you to make the film?
Well, actually, I suffered from panic attacks myself, and that was a very shaking experience, because I had no idea what was happening to me or my body. I just felt that something was completely wrong, like a broken record of a sort. It didn't feel like it was something I could talk my way out of. So a friend of mine told me that I could try some mindfulness meditation, and I tried that. Sort of, I was hesitant that it would work, because we were chewing a raisin for 15 minutes, and I thought it was a bit crazy.
Yes, the traditional chewing of the raisin, I know it well.
But I was sitting in this group, and we all had different kinds of problems. But over the 8 weeks course, it was really amazing what happened. 50% of the group fell out, but the ones that stayed, it was a very interesting experience to see how much we all changed. So what I wanted to go further into was to look into why did we change, and what exactly happens during meditation. Was it just because we told ourselves that this was going to work and we really wanted it to work, that it was working, or did something physical actually happen in the brain? So that was my initial. That's why I wanted to make the film, because at that time, all I was offered was medication, and I just felt that that was not what I wanted to try. So I thought it was really important that people get more information about what kind of options are there if you suffer from anxiety or depression or panic, or all these kind of things that most of us run into at some point in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, you attended a conference where you saw Richie give a talk in Massachusetts, correct? Tell us about that and how you two met.
Yeah, well, we were there researching for the best scientists in the world to talk about this subject. So we met several different people, but I think that both Sigrid and I felt that when we saw Richie give his talk, that he was the one, because Richie was it was very easy to understand when he talked about the research that can be very difficult to understand. It was easy to understand his experiments, and they looked very rigorous, which was important to me, but he was very playful in the way that he both designed experiments and also the way he communicated to people about this field. So I thought that was he was a great character already at that point. So it was easy to see that he would work well in a film.
Yes, and having seen Richie speak in person several times, most recently here in Minneapolis with Mathieu Ricard, he is a very engaging speaker. So we'll speak with him in a few minutes about the science behind this. But Phie, if you could tell us about the film and who's in it, and what are their stories?
Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to say that I felt was important about Richie is also that he's a meditator himself. Because for me, that was kind of important, that if you want to explore an area, you have to know about it. You have to feel it. It's not something you can read in a book. It's like if you're a chef, you have to taste the meal in order to refine it. So for me, it was important that Richie knew so much about this in a much more deep level than just from reading about it. So So that's also, he's part of the film, and the other characters are two veterans who've been to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then there's a story about a little boy, Will, who's 5 years old, and he suffers from ADHD.
Yeah, you have a very nice dichotomy of those stories and their progress throughout the film. You tie in the experiences of the veterans and the little boy very well, that these stories are not based on one's age, that these techniques still apply.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to show, that it's basically we're all just human beings, and even though you could say that what does a little 5-year-old boy have to do with some veterans that have gone through war and seen terrible things, but basically we're just all very much alike.
Hmm. Hmm. You also have some very good graphics as part of the film to make it more approachable to a non-scientific audience. You have some cartoon sequences. Can you tell a little bit about those, and then we'll go over to Richie for questions?
Yeah, well, we've been through some very hard work with those animations, because in the beginning we thought it was important that they were scientifically correct. So we hired an animator who worked as a scientist too, but it turned out that it's very difficult to work with storytelling at the same time as you show something that's scientifically correct. So we had to work in a different way and just make the brain an artistic layer and just make it pure emotion and pure just storytelling, and not stick to any kind of science at all. So that's been quite a process. The little cartoons are actually made by my husband, who's a cartoonist. So
Ah,
that's pretty easy.
he did a wonderful job on them because they made it immediately understandable.
Exactly, but that's also what I thought was really important about this film. It's not art, it has to be something that's easily understood, because we all have brains and we all have problems, and it's really easy not to keep that information to yourself. It's really easy that a wide audience understands what happens. So I wanted it to be very clear that it's not for special few people. This is for everybody, and everybody can understand it.
Exactly, and that's why it's good for us to be able to see exposure to these practices in the popular media, and film is a wonderful way to do that, to expose that this really is a human practice. It's not based on anyone's particular ideological stance or set of beliefs. So, Richie, let's switch over to you. The program that is featured in the film is an intensive 7-day session rather than what we often see in studies, which is the 8-week MBSR-based program. Has the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds done programs like this before?
In our center, we are exploring many different kinds of options with respect to the frequency and intensity of practice to learn something about how best to deliver these practices for a wide range of people, and also the question of whether some people may benefit from certain ways of presenting the practices compared to others. So we have looked at interventions that range from a few days to a week to a couple of weeks to several months to years. We've really looked at that entire continuum. And this is part of an ongoing program of research where we hope that across studies and across time, we'll be able to learn more about what kinds of strategies may be most important for which kinds of people. And for a variety of reasons, we thought that this program, this 7-day program, would be particularly effective for veterans, in part because of scheduling issues, in part because the intensity that comes with a more concentrated 7-day program can produce more immediate and palpable change, which I think can help sustain their motivation for participating. So for all those reasons, we elected to try that for this study.
Wonderful. Now, for the study itself, the center did several different kinds of tests, and you show little snippets of that in the documentary itself. And that includes brain scans, and you did these before and at the end of the 7-day session. Can you tell us about a couple of the different kinds of tests you did, what they were, and what results did you see?
Well, I can certainly tell you about what we've done, and I can tell you some about the results, but other components of the results are still very much in the process of being analyzed. One of the domains that we looked at were physiological recordings that we measured before and after the 7-day intervention. And one of the things in particular that we studied is startle, because there's evidence to suggest that post-traumatic stress disorder is associated with accentuated startle. And so that was one component that was particularly important to us. Other components had to do with attention. There is evidence to suggest that people with post-traumatic stress disorder have their attention pulled by stimuli which are related to trauma and negative affect, and their minds are attracted, if you will, to those kinds of stimuli which cause them to be quite distractible. And so some of the things that we looked at, and one of the biggest changes that we saw was a significant reduction in their startle reactivity. Startle is associated with the symptom of hypervigilance, and this is something that improved quite substantially over the course of this 7-day intervention with the vets. There were other measures that reflect attention and things related to attention, like working memory, the ability to hold information in one's mind. And again, if you're attentionally distracted, you won't perform well on this task. And we saw improvements on those objective measures as well. And those improvements in both startle as well as in these attention measures were also associated with reductions in their symptoms of PTSD that we obtained. So all of these changes kind of hang together in a meaningful way. So those are, some of the things that we saw. The brain scan measures we are doing in a larger study that is still going on now with this same intervention. And the findings from that study have not yet been analyzed, so we can't provide that at this point.
Well, that's all right, but that is a nice segue to the next question about contemplative neuroscience is very early in its development, and sometimes there's questioning around the rigor of controls on neurological studies. Are there some common gaps that you see? Are there things that researchers might do to ensure their studies have more reliable results?
Well, this is a very tough problem for many different reasons. Some of them are technical, which probably would take us a little far afield, but let me summarize a few. One of the most critical issues is the nature of the comparison group or control group in studies in contemplative neuroscience. Simply giving a person an intervention of any kind is likely to be beneficial because you're paying attention to them, and there is therapeutic benefit from simply the act of paying attention. And so this is something that needs to be considered carefully in doing studies of this kind. When we have evaluated mindfulness-based stress reduction, we have developed a very rigorous comparison intervention that is structurally matched to MBSR. It's matched in terms of number of contact hours, in terms of homework or practices assigned each day, the enthusiasm of the instructors, and the confidence in the instructors that these are practices that will promote well-being is matched. So we went to very unusual lengths to very rigorously match the comparison group to the active intervention group. That is rarely done in studies of this kind. It's rarely done because it's very time-consuming and it's very expensive. And most people simply don't have the resources or the time to do that kind of rigorous comparison group. But ultimately, if this work is going to penetrate the mainstream, we believe that it's obligatory that we hold ourselves to the same kinds of absolutely impeccable standards that other kinds of intervention research in the medical domain are held. And so that's the kind of standard that's really required. So that's a huge issue. Another issue is that a lot of work on the effects of meditation has relied on some simple self-report measures, questionnaire measures. And if you ask a person how anxious they are or how much compassion they have, most people, after they get an intervention that they know is designed to reduce anxiety and promote compassion, will tell you on the questionnaire that they are less anxious and more compassionate. But that doesn't really mean very much. It's all about how you behave in the world, not what you say. Your actions are much more consequential than your words. So these are issues that all need to be considered. And we need to find other ways of measurement that go beyond self-report. And so in the study that Phie filmed, we obviously used questionnaire measures, but we also used a whole bunch of other measures in order to determine whether changes that we see in self-report measures are actually correlated with changes that we see in these more objective measures. So that's something critically important for studies of this kind.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And it is a very exciting time. This is very early on in the field of contemplative neuroscience. So certainly it's going to become more robust and it will mature over time. Sigrid, let's switch over to you. I want to get a bit more into the filmmaking aspect of it. What was it about this project that made Danish documentary production interested in filming?
Well, Phie is a director that has been doing films that on the paper were kind of science films, but she's done them very emotionally with emotional characters and made them more mainstreamish, you could say it that way. And I find it fascinating that it's a topic or a subject that's quite difficult to understand for normal people, and the way that Phie makes this transaction between really hard science and more mainstream filmmaking is giving it a possibility of getting out to a broader audience. So she's made a film before called Mechanical Love. That's an earlier work of hers. And Free the Mind is her second film in a trilogy about the human mind. So for us, it was natural that we, of course, had to go on Phie's journey again, even though we know it takes a long time. It's a 5-year work of making a film like this. But now she's in the making of the third one. So we are just on the early steps of the last one in the trilogy now. So it's been a very important project for me as a producer and for Danish documentary to support this trilogy, even though it is a very scientific trilogy, you could say. But it really has a great potential for reaching an audience and for people to understand more about our brain and who we are as human beings.
I'm going to have a question for each of you, and Sigrid, we'll start with you. What did you find the most challenging and the most rewarding about working on this film?
Well, the most challenging thing was that we started financing the film quite early in the process because this was the second film in the trilogy. So for those film institutes and TV stations that had already been giving support for the first film, they knew what they were going to get, what kind of quality they were going to get on the second film. So we did approach financiers quite early in the process. But to find Richie and to find out exactly how the film was going to be, and also to find the right experiment that Richie was doing, and to be patient on when he had that experiment set up and all the approvals and stuff like that for Phie to film there, that was really very difficult because we had to go back to the financiers 2 or 3 times and tell them, oh, it's not going to be about a film about inmates. It's going to be a film about war veterans. And, oh, guess what? We also have a school and a little boy. And everybody was like, excuse me, are you going to include a little boy together with war veterans? It was a struggle each time to keep everybody happy and on track that we were doing the right thing. So I think that was a big challenge. And then, of course, to lift the artistic level, the music is recorded with a symphony orchestra and in Prague, and the animations, we changed them 2 times, and they are very expensive, these animations. So to get everything together financially and creatively and keeping all the financiers going for 5 years, that was a very big challenge. But of course, it's very rewarding for two Danish filmmakers to get a film that has the possibility to actually talk with the world, and that's what I'm very excited about with this project. That it's not a purely only Danish film; it has the Danish qualities of the filmmaking, but it is a film that talks to people in the world, and it's satisfying to get a film out, and people seem very happy about it and engaged and really want the film out and discuss it. So that's to do a difference, to make a difference with the film you're making. That's a very, very rewarding thing.
Good. And Phie, how about you? Same questions. What did you find the most challenging and the most rewarding about working on the film?
Well, like Sigrid said, it's a film that changed the theme and the experiment a few times. But what I learned is something that it's a pleasure to work as a documentary filmmaker because it really supports your meditation, that you have to just see what's there and not just go for what you think might be there, or you have to just look at what's possible now and get the most out of that. And that's been a challenge, but also really a great challenge because you have to try and live your life like that every day. So in this film, it's been sort of a teacher that you have to, even though experiments are changing, and I couldn't meet the veterans before they started the actual experiment because of the IRB that protects the participants in American experiments. There's a lot of, I had to calm myself and say, okay, I'll just meet them and I'll look at them and I'll make my judgment at that point who's going to be in the film, and I have to trust that the ones who are going to be in the film will come by themselves. And that's been quite challenging, but also very, very good to calm down more and not be so planned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Richie, how about you? What was the most challenging and most rewarding for you about working on the film?
Well, what was most rewarding for me was really getting to know Phie and having her come into our center and lab and life. And I had an inkling when we began this that she was someone that I could trust, and we provided a very unusual level of access, which actually we have never done before with any journalist or filmmaker, and haven't done anything like this since. And so it, I think, took a very unusual kind of chemistry for that to happen. And so, I'm very grateful for the process. And also, as both Sigrid and Phie have described, I genuinely believe that this is a film that helped to change the world in ways that are extremely beneficial. I've been a scientist for more than 30 years and written hundreds of scientific papers, but what I see in this film is an ability to tell that story in a way which, frankly, is much more compelling than any of the scientific papers I've ever written, and it can achieve that with a much wider audience. And so I just feel extraordinarily grateful that we collectively have this opportunity, and I think that I'm also grateful because we're all on the same page with this, and I think our motivations really are perfectly aligned. In terms of challenges, there certainly were many small challenges along the way in terms of staying on schedule with the research in a way which would be consistent with the filming schedule, getting the kinds of permissions, doing what we needed to do to allow Phie to get access to the subjects themselves and their families. Some of the filming that we did was not all in our lab, but in remote places. Some of which didn't end up in the film, but were quite challenging and extraordinary, including Phie filming an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Sikkim, India, which was quite a story in and of itself for her to get there and be able to do this. And so there were all kinds of challenges along the way, but I think we had great fun together, and I look forward to more.
Terrific. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about that process of exposing this to a popular audience, because, of course, scientific papers are typically read by other scientists and not the general community. We have some premiere dates coming up, and Sigrid, I'd wonder if you would be willing to talk for a few minutes about those.
We are premiering the film on the 3rd of May in New York at the Rubin Museum. And the film will be running there for a while, we hope, in the cinema, depending, of course, of how many people will buy tickets. But we definitely hope it's going to stay there for at least 2-3 weeks. And we are probably or hopefully opening up in 1 or 2 cinemas in New York as well, other than the Rubin Museum later on. And then we have a premiere date set on the 15th of May in Madison. And I'm looking very much forward to that premiere because the participants are going to be there and their families. And Richie has a very special day there for the center. So I hope it's going to be a really nice premiere with people that has been involved with the film for all these years and really have a lot of passion for the film. So the Madison premiere is a bit different. So those are the premieres that we have in the US, but the film will also premiere in the cinema in Canada. And we haven't gotten those dates yet, but we think it's going to be around the 17th of May in Toronto, and then it's opening up in about 6 or 7 cities in Canada. But in the US, we still don't know how many cities we can open up in, and that's why we are doing this crowdfunding campaign now to try to raise money so that we can actually open the film up in more cities, because it's quite expensive running ads and renting cinemas and stuff like that, having outreach campaigners working on the film to get a hold of people who want to see it. And I mean, US is a huge country. Saying this as 2 Danes from a very, very small country, we are blown away by the size of United States. So we do need to raise a lot of money in order for us to get the film out. So that is what we're doing right now, running this crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo.
Wonderful. So let's talk for a few minutes. I want the listeners to the podcast to know about a few things I'm putting on the episode page for this episode. Of course, we will have a link to the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds. We'll also have a link to the Free the Mind website and the Facebook page, but we'll also be including a link to the Indiegogo campaign. And I am a supporter of this film, and those of you who are listening like to contribute, you can. That will be available there as well. And I've also put in a preview of the film, just a snippet embedded in the episode page for this episode. So you can see what it's about and then go to the Indiegogo campaign if you'd like to support it. We do encourage you to do so. I wanted to thank our guests today, so we'll go through one at a time and thank them for their time. First, Sigrid Dyekjaer. Sigrid, thank you for being here.
No problem. It was a pleasure, Ted.
And Phie Ambo, thank you for being here as well.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And Dr. Richard Davidson, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.